Throughout her reign, Elizabeth faced many significant threats, but the greatest among them was the Spanish Armada. Philip II had decided he was going to invade England in 1585 and secured papal approval for his plans to depose Elizabeth and restore Catholicism in England. Since Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth in 1570, Philip saw it as his Catholic duty to carry out the wishes of the Church and depose Elizabeth. Spain had backed several plots against Elizabeth that had all failed, so the Armada represented his most direct attempt. While there were many factors that contributed to Philip's plan to invade England, chief among them was his long-held view that Elizabeth was a heretic that had to be overthrown for her persecution of Catholics in England and support for the Protestant rebels in the Netherlands. The point of no return for Philip came when Mary Queen of Scots was executed at Fotheringhay Castle in 1587, after her letters were discovered by Sir Francis Walsingham, which encouraged the assassination of Elizabeth as part of the Babington plot. Though the Babington plot was supported by the Pope and Philip, he was nevertheless outraged by Mary's execution. In her will, Mary had left her claim to the English throne to Philip, who would invade England to claim it and avenge Mary, using the Armada. Philip ordered the construction of the largest invasion fleet in European history at that time, comprising of 130 Spanish warships that carried 2,431 cannon and almost 30,000 soldiers and sailors. The Armada was a terrifying and seemingly indestructible force. It had taken over 2 years to construct the ships and gather the supplies needed for such a large fleet, as it had been delayed due to the actions of Sir Francis Drake in the New World and his devastating raid on the port of Cadiz. Originally, the fleet was to be commanded by the greatly experienced and celebrated Admiral Alvaro de Bazan, Marquess of Santa Cruz, but he had died in February 1588, and so the fleet would be led by the less experienced Duke of Medina Sidonia. Medina Sidonia had been chosen by Philip due to his high social status, his reputation as a devout Catholic, and his abilities in organisation and administration. But the most important reason for his appointment was his ability to follow orders without question. However, historians discovered a letter to the king among Medina Sidonia's papers, in which he stressed the reasons he felt he was ill-suited to lead the Armada, citing a lack of military experience, lack of intelligence of the English fleet, his failing health, and even seasickness. The Armada set sail from Lisbon in May of 1588 and was ordered to make its way through the English Channel to the Spanish Netherlands, where it would link up with the Duke of Parma and collect 27,000 soldiers for the invasion of England. Parma and Medina Sidonia were then to land at beaches along the Kent coast and march inland towards London, where they would depose Elizabeth as a heretic and establish a Catholic government that was loyal to the papacy, restoring England as a Catholic nation. As an island nation, England had always needed a powerful navy to defend its coastlines, and the development of powerful warships was a great annual expenditure. Admiral Sir John Hawkins was the treasurer of the Royal Navy during Elizabeth's reign, and long before the Spanish Armada during the 1570s had advised Elizabeth that English warships required modifications to improve their speed and manoeuvrability. As a result, the Navy had built a small fleet of 24 galleons that could easily outpace and outturn anything within the Armada. This enabled English ships to present their broadside to Spanish ships with greater speed, and this would prove a key factor in England's victory. Another factor that made English galleons a more potent force was the smaller size of their gun carriages, which allowed for the recoil of the cannon when it was fired. With more space on deck, gun crews could reload their cannon with greater speed, maintaining a higher rate of fire. While galleons were the battleships of their day, the smaller number of them in the Royal Navy meant that they alone were not responsible for the defeat of the Spanish Armada. There were many other contributory factors that helped lead to its demise. Drake's attack on the port of Cadiz had destroyed thousands of barrels of supplies intended for use on board the ships of the Armada. This meant that new barrels had to be quickly constructed to replace them, but were made of low-quality wood, which spoiled the food they contained. The delays to the Armada proved costly, with poor weather keeping them in port for longer than expected. When the invasion fleet finally reached the English Channel, they had already been at sea for more than 10 weeks before being able to engage the Royal Navy. When the Armada was first spotted in the English Channel, beacons were lit along the coast to warn Elizabeth that the invasion was imminent, and the Royal Navy gave chase. Drake, on board his ship, the Revenge, managed to capture the Spanish ship Rosario, which had been damaged. Unable to escape, the Rosario had drifted towards the English fleet and was quickly captured by Drake and his crew. When they boarded the ship, they found they had captured Admiral Pedro de Valdez, along with a cargo of gold and silver to pay the soldiers and sailors of the Armada. While taking stock of what they had captured, English sailors saw that the food supplies on board the deck of the Rosario had already begun to rot. This was due to the low-quality barrels that were constructed to replace those lost during Drake's raid on the port of Cadiz. Historians have confirmed through letters written by the Duke of Medina Sidonia that the Armada was already low on supplies when they reached the English Channel. Deep-sea archaeologists have also found evidence that even the cannonballs that were supplied were of inferior quality. The original plan of the Armada was to join forces with the Duke of Parma in the Netherlands and to launch the invasion from there. However, the timing would be crucial in order to ensure that Parma's forces were ready at the correct time. Communication between Medina Sidonia and the Duke of Parma proved a great difficulty, and as messages had to go by sea, they took a great deal of time and were unreliable. Medina Sidonia's first message informing Parma he'd arrived in the Channel took a week to reach him. Due to the English defence of Ostend under Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, Parma did not have access to deep water ports for their galleons. This meant that Spanish soldiers had to embark on smaller ships, which would take at least 48 hours to load and join the Armada. By the time Medina Sidonia's message reached the Netherlands, the Armada was already off the coast of Calais and preparing to engage the Royal Navy, so it was too late for Parma to join them, as the English ships were already prepared to attack. On the 29th of July 1588, the Armada was first sighted in the English Channel, and Royal Navy ships, under the command of Sir Francis Drake, set sail from Plymouth to intercept them. On July 31st, Drake ordered his fleet to open fire, with 2 Spanish ships being damaged and captured. Medina Sidonia hoped to reach the Isle of Wight, where the Armada could weigh anchor for a few days. This was to allow the Duke of Parma time to ensure his fleet was prepared, so their invasion could begin. However, between the 3rd and 4th of August, the Armada came under attack from the heavy cannon of English ships, who chased them through the English Channel. This exchange of fire gave the Royal Navy great insight into the Armada's capabilities. As the two forces fired at one another, the Earl of Nottingham, Charles Howard, saw that their ships could fire their cannon 6 times before the Armada could return fire once. Realizing this advantage, he disengaged his ships to save ammunition for the battle ahead. The decisive battle began on the night of the 6th of August, as the Royal Navy launched fire ships towards the Armada's crescent formation. This caused panic among the Spanish captains, who broke ranks and scattered to avoid being hit by the flaming ships. By the morning of the 8th of August, the Armada had managed to regain formation, and the Royal Navy launched their attack at the Battle of Gravelines, near Calais. Medina Sidonia had no choice but to engage the English ships without the support of the Duke of Parma's fleet. Remaining a safe distance from the Armada, English ships bombarded them with superior firepower, causing tremendous damage. The Spanish ships could not return fire quickly, due to the barrels of supplies that cluttered their deck space and slowed their gun crews when reloading. With the English ships' manoeuvrability and greater speed, Medina Sidonia found his own ships were outclassed and lacked the firepower to deal severe damage. Spanish captains had wanted to come alongside the English ships and send boarding parties to attack, but this proved impossible. By around 4 p.m. on the 8th of August, the English ships began to run low on ammunition and withdrew from battle, having sunk or captured 5 ships and causing a great amount of damage to many others. The next day, on the 9th of August, a southerly wind allowed the Armada to escape. They headed through the North Sea, with the Royal Navy under Charles Howard in pursuit, to prevent any ships from landing on English soil until it drew level with the coast of Scotland. Once the Armada was well into Scottish waters, Howard broke from battle and returned to port. However, further problems were only just beginning for the Armada, who now had to navigate around the dangerous coast of northern Scotland and the Irish Sea on their way home. Precise records of the losses suffered by the Armada are unknown, but historians estimate that somewhere between 45 and 60 Spanish ships were lost, with a total of between 12,000 and 20,000 men killed, representing a loss of almost a third of the original force. Philip II is believed to have inadvertently played a key role in the defeat of the Armada among historians. Although he met with his military council many times before they embarked, he largely disregarded their advice and ignored their concerns. Elizabeth, however, did not interfere with military strategy, and the responsibility for England's defences laid with Sir Francis Drake, Sir John Hawkins and Charles Howard, Earl of Nottingham, who directed the battle according to their own initiatives. Before the Spanish Armada, Elizabeth gave a speech at Tilbury Dock to raise the morale of her troops as they prepared to defend England from invasion. The speech has gone down in history as one of the most significant and memorable of the period. Elizabeth's defeat of the Armada was a major propaganda victory that demonstrated the strength of the Royal Navy and gave England greater confidence to expand trade in the New World and commit to further exploration. To celebrate her victory, Elizabeth commissioned a new royal portrait depicting the Armada in battle formation in one panel and being destroyed by a storm in another. The painting has become known as the Armada portrait and is one of the most commonly known of the era. Elizabeth led a victory parade through London where thousands of people lined the streets, and a special commemorative medal was struck with the phrase "God blew and they were scattered," which suggested divine favour for the Protestant faith over the old religion. The victory was an enormous boost to English pride, as the nation had survived an attack from a far more powerful opponent, which also inspired the Dutch Protestant rebels to continue their fight against Spanish rule and strengthened the Anglo-Dutch alliance. If Philip had succeeded with his invasion plans, English support for the Dutch Protestants would have ended. This would have had a devastating effect for the cause of Dutch independence against Spanish rule in the Netherlands. Although Philip's defeat was a huge setback, he did not abandon the war, which would continue throughout Elizabeth's reign. Spain had suffered immense financial and military losses, and a long period of decline began after the defeat of the Armada.